everybody. Thanks for clicking the link and checking out the Big Bang Bristol podcast. My name's Alex Todd, and I'll be coming to you fairly regularly from here in beautiful Bristol, Virginia, the birthplace of country music, or as Johnny Cash once called it, the Big Bang of country music. The podcast series is going to focus on a lot of people I know, musicians and people I've been friends with for a long time. I'm also going to try to introduce myself and you to some people I don't know and tell some stories. Maybe gain some insight into the creative process. You know, we've got a lot of really diverse musical talent here in the area. We have a lot of singer-songwriters, guitar players, instrumentalists. We have bluegrass, blues, some heavy rock, and even a few guys out there doing some experimental music. The coffee's brewed, the mics are hot, the guests are booked. This week on the Big Bang Bristol podcast, my special guest is world-renowned luthier and accomplished fingerstyle guitarist, Gerald Sheppard. All right, let's get started. Okay, and as always, the first thing I want to do is thank Jesse Anderson of Newark, Delaware for the intro music there. Thanks, Jesse. Hey, Gerald, how are you today?
Doing good. Alex, you doing good?
Not too bad. It's a nice rainy day here. It's we can have a nice little conversation while we hopefully the weather passes.
Yeah.
So, how have you been keeping yourself busy? What you been up to?
Still been playing out a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm enjoying that.
That's good.
And I've got a lot of gigs lined up for next year, so I'm feeling pretty good about that sort of thing. As you know, I've slowed down on the guitar making,
right?
And that is still somewhat enjoyable, but mostly for the most part, I'm moving away from that as I am looking more toward retirement.
Right.
I've done it for 25 years, and and it's been great. I've really enjoyed it.
You make beautiful instruments. I was on the website last night just doing a little bit of homework, so I can be somewhat prepared for these conversations.
Well, thanks.
And I'm just blown away by just the style and the craftsmanship that you put into the instruments. I mean, they are flawless.
Well, I appreciate that. When I first started making instruments, and I decided that's what I wanted to do, which is kind of halfway into the beginning story. It's not the beginning story, but I found myself going into nice guitar shops and looking at the better guitars and thinking, wow, will I ever build a guitar as nice as these? If I'm going to do this, I'll need to. What I found out later on was that I would need to hand make guitars that were a lot nicer than the better guitars that you found in guitar shops. Because when people buy a handmade instrument, they want something that is not what they can find in a store. And if they're going to have to pay twice as much for it, or 3 times or 4 times as much for it, and some people charge 10 times as much for them, then they really need to, they're going to have high expectations, and you got to live up to it. So you have to offer them something that they're just blown away. And this is people who have owned the really big brand names in the past that were manufactured. So,
I mean, the quality is definitely there, and that speaks to, I think that speaks to your personality as far as your attention to detail. I know that when I'm making my guitars, that there's some things that I think I could probably do better, but in the process, I just kind of blow right past it. And I can tell, and I think anybody that has seen any of your instruments up close, that you definitely don't do that. You seem to have developed quality processes along the way to ensure that everything that you do is flawless. So where do you think that came from?
Well, that probably came from my previous work at Eastman Chemical. One thing you said is there's about your guitar making is there's things you could do better. I think even after 25 years of making guitars, I find myself thinking there's things I can do better. And if I find myself a little arrogant about what I can do, all I have to do is go out and look at some of the other guitar makers' websites and get blown away and come back and with my tail between my legs thinking,
Right.
oh man, I got work to do. But
well, I mean, if you think about it, though, those guys, that's an entire company. I mean, we're talking dozens of skilled luthiers, a marketing department, layered management. Whereas with myself, and I assume you too, I mean, it's like a one-man show. You're doing everything. So
I'm actually talking about the one-man shows that are so good, especially all over the world. There's some wonderful guitar makers or luthiers in general. Back to the processes. One of the things about anything you're manufacturing, whether it's a one-man job or whether it's a large company, you have to understand and study out your processes, and you have to find ways to make certain things absolutely consistent.
Right.
If a person goes into a restaurant and orders a hot dog, and they love that hot dog, they go back 6 months later and they want a hot dog that was put together exactly the same way.
Right.
And that's one of the things about your processes is they have to be consistent. And one of the first things that I had problems with when I first started making instruments, and I don't know anybody that would say that they haven't had this problem, was that there were certain parts of the process. There were certain processes, for example, bridge making or brace making or whatever it would be for you, that were just difficult. They were difficult to get it right. They were difficult to do it timely. And one of the main things that would always happen with first instruments is that there was a lot of rework, and the rework would happen in some of the same places.
Right.
You would find yourself tearing something back out and redoing it. And then the next guitar, you do that same thing. And isolating where your rework is and finding a jig or something that will help you make it perfect every time saves a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of frustration.
A lot of heartache, that's for sure.
Yeah.
See, sometimes I'll be laying in bed at night and I'll be going through my processes that I use, and I'll think of some jig that I could make, or I'll think of some setup on my CNC machine that is going to give me a more consistent output every time, instead of just kind of going up there going, oh, I hope it works.
Yeah. And once you do get that out of the way, then you can move to another one of those, and you just keep refining, because you've always got one process that's worse than every other process.
Oh yeah, that's for sure.
And so you just go to the bottom and start working on that next one, and pretty soon you're starting to get instruments out much more consistently.
Right.
Much more. They come out and they look and they play and they sound more like what you would want to put in the hands of somebody else rather than something you'd want to hide under your bed.
That's true. What inspires me a lot is I'll go on YouTube and I'll watch videos from the different manufacturers. Like, they'll give you like a Gibson factory tour or a Fender factory tour or a Taylor guitars, for example. And what always amazes me is all the special fixtures and special jigs that they've got for each step in the process. And I think that speaks a lot to what you were just talking about, is that they've already worked that out, and they know how to put binding on a headstock, for example, and they've got a jig for that. They don't, all of these different steps along the way, they've worked that out already. And so that's why I think they're able to make such consistent guitars. I think the challenge for me is that that's also an investment of time and money, and so that all has to factor into the price of the instrument. I think that's what people often don't understand, is that the reason that these instruments are the price that they are, the price point that they're at, is that, there's $100,000 worth of tools involved in that. It's not just some guy out in his garage with a router. There are literally dozens of setups for each step in the process. So that often inspires me. Or if I run into something that I'm not quite sure how to do, or the best, if it's just handwork, I'm thinking there's got to be something I can use to make this handwork easier, so that inspires me a lot, is to watch those factory tours. So, and then whenever I visit other makers, their shops, then, it I see, oh, that's what they're using to do that, or that's or if I use a similar process, that always makes me feel like I might be onto something.
One of the things I noticed about luthiery world is the sharing. To me, a luthier is not a guitar maker. I've had guys, they build one guitar and then they hang their shingle out as a luthier. I hardly ever even spoke of myself as a luthier, because I think a luthier is probably a person who is involved with all kinds of stringed instruments and really, really understands stringed instruments. When we talk to other builders or luthiers, one of the things I've noticed is that while we see certain things as it's our business from the standpoint of you don't steal our designs, that sort of thing.
Right.
We're very, very open and sharing about a lot of things. The luthiery business and the people involved with it are almost like a family in a way. We've all had our heart go to the floor when we've goofed something up really bad, and we've all been elated when somebody comes and looks at our instruments and they're a well-known name. And we like to share how we were able to accomplish a certain task or that sort of thing. And that's really helpful, because you don't feel like you're stealing from somebody when you go to their shop and they show you how did they do something. They just really are almost honored to be able to show you how you can do something a little bit better. And that is one of the positive things that I found in this world. While we were all walking around in a room by ourselves, or maybe with one or two other people all our life, during the day and sometimes halfway through the night, we aren't alone, because you can pick up your phone and call just about any luthier in the world and they'll make time for you.
Right.
And when you see them at shows and stuff, they'll tell you more about, they'll tell another builder more about what they're doing than they'll tell their customers a lot of time, because they're just very sharing people. And I really,
it's a shared passion.
Yeah.
If you're able to successfully complete an instrument and it to be something that's playable and something that you're proud of, then, that's a great feeling, and then when you find somebody else that has done it as well, that's definitely something you can discuss, because there's lots of different ways to skin that cat. I mean, there's a lot of different methods to make certain things. So, when you find somebody that has a different perspective on it, that's always real interesting.
Yeah, and one of the things is some guitar customers, some clients that you have, really understand what it took for you to get that instrument into their hands.
Right.
But other makers definitely understand what you had to learn and what you had to go through, and they empathize. And sometimes we're envious of each other, but we also respect each other a lot for that.
Right. Yeah, something that I admire about your instruments is the finish. The quality of your finish just seems to be flawless. I mean, I'm on the path where I've yet to achieve something that's in that same ballpark. And that's something I think people don't realize as well, is that the carpentry, the woodworking aspect of the guitar making is not, I mean, it's not an easy task, but in terms of that compared to how you finish your guitar, that's a much larger portion of the completed instrument, because that's what people see initially, right? They see the shine, they see no scratches, no dents, no dings, and really that's something that I didn't realize. I mean, I came from a carpentry background, so when I got into finish work, I was like, man, I can work the wood, but when it comes to making it shiny and perfect, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, it's a several week long process, and for every guitar, for me to the guitar sprayed and polished out. And there are different ways to do it, but
And there's so many products out there,
Right.
that it's hard to determine what's the best product for you, and then the application and polishing part of it. I think that's usually when I speak to other luthiers or other makers, and that's usually where I pick their brain, is because I'll say, I'm having a problem with this. How do you achieve that?
Every aspect of instrument making, just about every aspect, has this question that you have to ask yourself, and that is, how long am I going to be doing this, and how much do I want to spend, and how safe is it to do it this way rather than that way 50 times or 100 times.
Right.
You don't just think, how am I going to finish this next guitar? You have to think about, I've got to build a process for doing it for the next 5 years or something like that.
And then investing in the machinery or the equipment to do that.
Once you decide to go with one direction or another based on many factors, safety and all kinds of stuff, then you're pretty much locked into it.
Right.
Because every process is a learning process. Every way you do whatever it is, whether it's making a bridge or gluing braces or finishing the guitar. Some things don't lock you in quite as much, but finishing does.
Oh man, it's that's a tough nut to crack. It really is.
Yeah.
And everybody's got a little bit different take on it. Even if you do try to watch tutorials or read things, everybody's got their own process, and so you kind of got to figure out what your product is, and then what your process is going to be after that. You can't necessarily take advice from everyone because they're using different stuff, right?
Right.
So so you started, from what I read from your website, it looks like you started in '93. Now, was that building or was that repair work? Where did that come from? How did you find yourself with this desire?
Well, when I was a boy, I started playing guitar, and I was 15 years old. I was lucky enough to own a really nice guitar. It was a repossessed Gibson guitar that was in perfect condition except for a scratch on the side, and I got it for $3 a week at where I bought it. And that opened up a lot of doors for me because a lot of other people were playing brands that were not as playable, and they didn't sound very good when you did play them right.
Right.
I had this Gibson J45, and I think
that's a great.
I think it was
guitar.
a 45. It was the blonde body. There's the 45 and there's the 51. One had a blonde top, one had a colored top on it. The reason I go to that direction is because that guitar played well, it was playable, it sounded good when I played it well, and it allowed me to learn to play. But it also, as I went by and owned other guitars, I was always, my dad fixed everything himself. We repaired cars, we took engines apart, we did everything ourselves. And so I spent a lot of time in my dad's shop, and one thing I learned how to do is do my own repair work and maintenance work. And later on, I started, doing little things for people from time to time, and I really enjoyed that.
It's important to get that background of mechanical knowledge.
Yeah, and it's also hard to understand. Some people are just all thumbs, and some people do have a little bit of the finesse, the ability to understand how to fix something without breaking it and all that sort of thing. And I always had a little bit of a talent in that direction, but I never worked with wood until 1992 when I started my first guitar from a kit. And the reason I did that was because I had owned a really nice Martin and other nice guitars, and I just thought, I saw an advertisement for a kit in a magazine, and I started out with a kit. I built a kit. Then I built another kit. And then in 1993, I decided that I would like to build some guitars to see if I could sell them.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really realize I was going to quit my day job in the engineering division of Eastman Chemical down the road 10 years later, actually, and start doing it full time. But when I did that, when I built those three guitars, they turned out well. And as a guitar player, I knew they sounded good. And I built these instruments, and they came out really nice. I was pretty pleased with them. The hardest part was the finish.
It always is.
And I sold those instruments. I sold the first one locally for around $1,000 to a fellow. Then I sold another one for around $1,200. I thought, well, I might want to try to do this a little bit more. So I called a fella, another luthier out. I think he lived in California at the time. And I asked him, I said, well, how can I sell these guitars? He spent plenty of time with me. He didn't know me from Adam. We got to be friends later. But he said, just put you a little ad in the back of Acoustic Guitar Magazine. He said, just, spend $40 or $50. Just put a little tiny ad back there saying that you make guitars. I didn't think that would work. And in a way, it didn't work well. But in one way, it did. There was a high-end guitar shop in Nashville that saw the ad. And they called me up and they wanted me to send them a guitar to look at. And I said, now, wait a minute. If you got Martins and Taylors and stuff like that in your shop, I'm not even going to fool with it, because I've tried to do that locally and they won't let me put my guitars on the wall, because they can sell 3 guitars Martins off the wall in that same spot, and mine sits there for a year. Right. And the person on the other end said, no, really, we only handle handmade instruments and we want to see what you do. Well, I sent the instrument down and they said, well, we don't like your case. It's a cheap case, but we think we should ask $3,450 for this guitar. It's a really nice guitar. Wow. Well, that was the third of those 3, and I'd sold the other 2 for $1,000 and couldn't even put the third one into a local shop because they didn't know anything about me. They sold that guitar in a month, and they told me that it was a nice instrument. So that was the beginning in around 1993 of me confirming to myself that this was something else I did pretty well, and I loved doing it. There was nothing more fun than strumming the guitar the first time when you put that first set of strings on it. Yeah. I used to tell people it was like slapping a baby on the butt, when it was first born. Yeah. You're giving life to something. And
it's something that you've invested, I would say. I mean, I don't know how long your process takes, but, a month or several weeks to several months of anticipation, so that when you finally hit the first chord or do the first run on it, it's there's a lot of pent up questioning of whether or not this thing's going to sound good or not. So
you get more confident after 25 years. You don't even think about it much, but I do remember the first few guitars I made. I just couldn't wait to get them done. I wanted to rush, and it was so hard to back off and do things right.
That's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm so happy. I'm so elated about it that I just want to get it finished and get it strung up.
Yeah,
so
you
that
want
I
to hear it that first time. Yeah. The thing is, you don't want to sabotage it.
Well, I know. Well, see, I've done that. I've created some nice firewood as well. So I would imagine, I'm not for certain here, but I would imagine that your first few kits were probably Dreadnought style Martin-esque guitars.
No, I built 2 kits in the beginning, and that was on the very front end, and I've still got the first guitar I ever made. And the second one, a guy bought it right out of my arms. He said, how much you want for the guitar? And I said $800. And the next thing I know, it was going down the road in the back of his truck. And I was going, what did I just do?
Yeah, man, I should have doubled that.
But actually, when I built those 3, they were all Dreadnoughts.
Yeah. Because
that changed.
I would imagine at the time that's probably what was available in terms of kits.
Those first 2 were OEM kits. Okay. Because I'm a fingerstyle player.
Right.
And I wanted something that had a little less of the overtones and a little clearer.
More concentrated mid-range.
Yeah. So generally, I have all these years made 5 models. I think I made what I called a petite concert, which is about the size of a 00. And then I built the grand concert, which is like an OEM or a 000.
Right.
I built a grand auditorium, which is a little bit bigger guitar, but still a tight waisted guitar. And then I build a jumbo, and I build a Dreadnought. But primarily, probably, I built very, very few of anything other than grand concerts and grand auditoriums, because I understood fingerstyle guitar and I aimed toward that market.
Right.
And so those orders, I had more of those by a long shot than hardly anything else.
So that's kind of where I was going with that question was, what made you, or how did you determine your body shapes? And I think you kind of answered it because you were aiming towards a certain type of player in a certain market. So I would imagine that informed how you came up with your body shapes, right?
Yeah, we all cheat a little bit. A lot of people in the early 1900s and even before that did studies about body shapes and the type of sound they would produce and how that particular tool, that particular guitar would be designed for the style of play or the emphasis you wanted to put on. If you're a strummer, or if you played melodies, or if you play with your fingers, or you played with flat picks, or if you played loud or soft, or if you played bluegrass, if you played classical, whatever.
Right.
A lot of that it's done for you if you just study it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't break those rules. It's tried and true. It's physics.
Exactly.
But in many other ways, aesthetics can play a part and not really impact the tone.
Mm-hmm.
You can reshape, Martin has an OM or triple O. It's pretty much the same shaped guitar. I called it a little bit low hipped, the shape of it. A lot of people build almost identical guitar, but it's a little bit more graceful looking and concentric on the lower bout,
mm-hmm.
the large end. I don't think that changes the tone significantly, and tone is so subjective that people say, well, does something impact the tone? Well, yeah, it may impact it bad, it may impact it good.
Right.
But I have never seen anything, to say, well, that's negative or that's positive, or have I've never even been able to discern differences. But body shapes are a little bit subjective, but there is a certain aspect. If you're a fingerstyle player, you do not want overtones wiping out the notes in the middle of the register
mm-hmm.
When you're trying to get your melody above your harmonies.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a fingerstyle player, you don't want your guitar to take off when you hit the loud passages so fast and so jangly that it's like going down a hill on a bicycle and your chain coming off and you don't know how to stop.
Right.
You want your guitar to be controllable without you having to constantly put your fingers across the strings to dampen it and that sort of thing. And all of that has to do with the shape
mm-hmm.
and the size and the depth of the instrument. And truthfully, you can learn a lot of that when you start to make guitars just by going out and spending hours in guitar shops and picking up different shapes and sizes of guitars and
absolutely.
playing them and see how they work with a certain style of music that you play.
Right.
And then you know where your boundaries are, and then you can move to aesthetics or whatever you want to with them.
Do you feel like what Wayne Henderson, who I spent a little bit of time with, what he always talked about was the top bracing and how the bracing, how close it is to the sound hole versus how close it is to the bridge is going to give you is definitely going to have a large influence on the tone of the guitar. So if you had, for example, a smaller bodied guitar, but moved the top bracing back a little bit, that it would drastically change the tone of that versus if it was maybe closer to the sound hole. Have you found that to be true, or what's your thought on that?
I think Wayne's correct. It's bracing locations, bracing height, thickness, bracing designs, all impact tone. It just depends on, again, the subjective preference that you have for the type of tone that you want, and it all matches in with the size of the instrument,
mm-hmm.
whether you play the type of wood that you're using, whether you play with your fingers, finger picks, flat picks. But yeah, the bracing locations where you place the bracing has a significant impact on the tone. But it also has a significant impact on the structural integrity of the instrument.
Right.
And so you have to be real careful about location of bracing, the weight, thickness, the design of the bracing itself, the bridge plate location is as it's located against, and we're talking about, of course, acoustic guitars here. And I know you build a lot of electrics and things are different there, but if you think about electric hollow bodies, you have some of these same questions.
Oh, absolutely.
And one of the things I've got a friend over in North Carolina who is a wonderful luthier. He's a repairman, and he repairs instruments for a lot of famous people. His name is Randy Hughes, and Randy told me one time, and I do recommend Randy if you have a really nice guitar you want repaired sometime. He also, him and his son have a shop now. They're building guitars, but Randy says, a lot of times I'll get guitars in here that were built by hand makers, and he said they really don't understand that you can only make things so light and so thin, and in that quest. And he said, so I have a guitar here that's 10 years old, and it's bellied, or the bridge is pitching forward, or there's issues like that. The bracing was too thin.
I think it's always a balance of how loud do I want to make this instrument versus how well will it stand up throughout the years.
Right.
What I tell the people that I work with, my customers, and anybody that will listen, is that it's not the tension of the strings that destroys the instrument. Because a lot of people think the string tension is what makes the neck bow and what makes the belly come up and all those things. But really, it's wet and dry, hot and cold, year after year. Temperature changes, environmental changes, that does more damage on the instrument than the string tension ever will. Having it properly humidified and in an environment that does not change the hot and cold, wet and dry aspect of the instrument is the best thing for the guitar. You can put heavy gauge strings on it. That's fine. It's not going to hurt it. But you definitely don't want to take it outside in the rain, bring it back into the heat 5 or 6 times in a row. You'll see more changes because of that than the string tension ever will. I mean, obviously the string tension does play a role in that. And as a maker, you are trying to build something that is loud or has a specific tone, but also you want to make something that you're not going to have to do warranty repairs on 10 years down the road, right?
Mm-hmm. I used to have in my advertising, there were 5 points that were important in the design of an instrument. If I tried to remember them now, I'm not sure I could, but there was aesthetics, of course, and there was tone, intonation, and playability. But one was durability. If you're just building an instrument for yourself and it breaks in 5 years, you're probably not going to give a hoot. But when you hang your shingle out as a business, you start paying those business taxes, and you start trying to build instruments that compete with other high-end makers, and you start telling people that you can do that, and you start charging a fortune for your instruments down the road when you finally can build your reputation enough to be able to build guitars for a living and eat both. Down the road, those instruments have to hold up, and those high expectations of those people that you work with are really, really high because they spend a lot of money. And on the front end, they expect a lifetime warranty.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure.
So that's part of the business, is to be sure that while you're chasing that elusive perfect tone and responsiveness and playability and all those sorts of things, durability is always in competition with it. It's like light versus shutter speed, or aperture versus shutter speed in photography. You have to know which way, how far you can go in either direction with all those things to end up with something that is the delicate balance.
Right. There was Martin made some dreadnoughts in the 70s that were referred to as the warranty guitars. They made them real thick. They made the braces real thick, and as a result, that era are not very sought after because they seem to be somewhat dead. Right? They held up great, but they just didn't sound very good. So at a certain point, people would go in the sound hole and shave the braces down and do things to try to improve the tone. But I think there's a good example of where durability won out over response.
Handmade instruments, you have to have a different approach from a manufactured instrument. A manufactured instrument, When I say manufactured, I'm talking about people that build hundreds or thousands of instruments a year. With lifetime warranties, they're primarily designed on paper and probably designed to a point by luthiers, but when the assembly process happens, it's just people off the street that know really very little about guitar making.
It's factory work, basically.
Right, it's factory work. And the instrument is going to be overbuilt a little bit because you have to have a lifetime warranty that compensates for that situation. People, they're just hourly paid people. Nothing wrong with that. That's the way that manufacture. But also, when it goes out the door, you don't know if that instrument is going to be in the weather or if it's going to be used on stage every night, if it's going to be just in a case underneath somebody's bed for its lifetime, or if it's going to be in a case or out of a case. You don't know what the situation is going to be, but it's still got that lifetime warranty. So they're slightly overbuilt. Almost every time I make an instrument for someone, I meet them or talk to them or spend time on the phone or see their other instruments. I know a little bit about those people. I know how they're going to use the instrument. And they get the benefit, I guess it's a benefit, of when I decide to take my lutherie hat off and put my consultant hat on with regard to the woods they choose and how they treat the instrument after they get it, how long they're going to have it. That gives me a little bit of room to push the limits where a manufacturer couldn't do it.
Right, so personal
because
touch.
The guitar would have problems with certain people.
Right.
It wouldn't hang together. It wouldn't do what it needs to do.
There's always a care and feeding package.
Right.
It goes along with it.
It gives you a little bit more room. I will say that in 25 years I've been making guitars, I've had probably less than 5 guitars come back for warranty work. 2 of those 5 were consecutive serial numbers, and the bridge was lifting on those 2. We know what was going on there. It was I either used a glue that I'd had around too long, or it was a bad batch of glue that came from the factory. Either way, they came back, and I replaced the bridges in a few minutes, and they never came back again. So I always felt pretty good. Even to this day, some of the first guitars I've made, I've not had much warranty. I've not had any warranty work, and other than those few times. And of course, we know that warranties only last for the original owner, and a lot of folks, they buy guitars and trade them off and stuff like that. But I seldom get calls for any type of work. People say, I've got one of your guitars here and I trust you with it. Would you do some repair work? It's out of warranty. I don't get those calls. And that tells me, it gives me confidence.
Right.
Because there's always, I don't care how long you've made instruments. It's just like any business. You worry about how good a job you're really doing, and your reputation and that sort of thing. And the only way you get confidence is when you look at the objective results of your work over time. Mm-hmm. And the lack of warranty work is a good indicator.
Absolutely. Well, I think it speaks again to just the level of quality that you put into your stuff. And also, I would say that the customers that you have, because of the price point that you're at, that's a very high-end customer. So I would imagine that they have enough intelligence to care for their instrument the way it should be properly cared for. Very rarely, I'd imagine that they're going to go take it outside and play it by the campfire. That's not exactly a campfire guitar.
Guitar enthusiasts purchase handmade instruments, and especially these days with forums and stuff, people learn a lot more and a lot faster, and they look at whatever their special interest is from a broader perspective than just somebody who goes down and buys an instrument, takes it home and plays it every once in a while.
Right.
So there is a lot more knowledge out there. There's a train of thought that says, oh man, maybe I can just build for dummies, and then they'll never know if I'm doing a good job or not. You've thought about that. It's like when you try to sell something these people that try to sell something on eBay, and they just figure they'll overcharge, and sooner or later some dummy will buy it.
Right.
I have found that the people who made me grow the most, and the people who are actually more satisfied with my work, were people who challenged me to do something different from my routine, for one. And I hated doing it when they asked me to, but once I did, I built it right into my next processes, and it turned out to maybe be profitable down the road.
Well, that's how we grow.
Right.
We're never going to challenge ourselves for no reason. But when you have a customer that says, I really want this, then you kind of have to go, okay, well, how can I do that?
Secondly, people who know the instruments. They've seen and played. They've been to shops. They've owned them before. They handmade instruments. They know those instruments. Their expectations aren't that you build them a guitar that levitates.
Right.
They just want. They know what they have when it's in their hands. And those people are the ones who are the most appreciative and the less critical. The problems I always had with clients, more often than not, were people who did not know what they had in their hands when they got it. They didn't know enough to be able to, even if they wanted to, respect what they had. Didn't know how to take care of it. And I think we've all had that. We've owned a really nice car or a really nice something where people just really knew what they were doing and engineered it well and all that sort of thing, but all we saw was just what was on the surface, and we didn't know what went into it. The people I've had the least problems with and have shown the most appreciation with have been the people who are really, really knowledgeable.
Right.
And
well, they understand the time and the dedication it takes to put out that type of a product.
It's just the opposite of what you would think, though. You would think, well, if a guy doesn't really know what he's got in his hands, he's not going to question me. He's just going to go along. But the thing is, those people do question you because they've paid a lot of money and they just think they got ripped off.
Right, because they'll go down, they'll go on the internet or go down to the music store and we'll see a $500 guitar hanging on the wall and they go, well, this is the same thing.
Right.
Yeah, but it's not.
Right. So I'm always been thankful for the people who called me who understood what they were getting when they got it.
Right. There seems to have been at some point a progression away from what some would consider like a traditional building style. You've incorporated armrests. You've incorporated some side sound holes. Was that due in part to your customers requesting that option, or was that something that you found that you wanted to incorporate to differentiate yourself between the other makers? How did some of those more progressive features end up in your instruments?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. What you're saying is true in all cases. People would ask for those things. I would look at my competitors' websites and see that I was not offering certain things that other people were offering. The very first things I noticed when I look at a builder's website is whether or not he's offering cutaways on an acoustic guitar. When you're first making instruments, that's a big challenge.
Absolutely.
And you just really have to dive into it and start doing it. And the first few you're going to have issues with. That was radical 20 years ago to put a cutaway on an acoustic guitar, or 30 or 40 years ago, I would have to say. When sound ports, which is nothing new, actually they first showed up, I think, on classical guitars many years ago. I think a guy named Ruck who built classical guitars. I'm not sure about this. When those started getting popular, and when bevels started getting popular, which also isn't a new idea, you had to ask yourself, do I want to lose that part of the market to my competition, or do I want to learn how to do it?
Right.
And if I'm going to learn how to do it, which way should I do it? There's many choices. In both of those cases, and other progressive cases like fan fret guitars or extended fingerboards and things like that, you do tend to watch your competition, and you tend to decide whether or not you want to do it and how you want to do it based on that. The best thing I always knew to do when I was trying to make a business decision based on market was to talk to people who handled and turned over lots of guitars, which were shops that had a couple of hundred hand-built guitars in there and sold 5 or 10 a day.
Right.
Had some of them coming back in. They knew what your customers wanted. they were, and I would just, especially if I was working with them, I had guitars in their shops. We talked. The thing you want to do is work in harmony with somebody like that, because the customer is his as well as yours. And
well, they're on the front line.
They're on the front line.
They hear the questions. They know what people are looking for.
They know what they're looking for. And so when it came to things like bevels and sound ports and other things, I would go to people like that and say, is this a frisbee or or a hula hoop, or is this something that's going to be around a while?
Yeah.
And that's when I would finally decide to make the move. And then I would have to decide what the design was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that would have to do with trial and error, or playing others at guitar shows and taking, thinking about what I felt, what I heard, and that sort of thing. And the pros and cons of those. For example, sound holes, where you locate that sound hole, the size of the sound hole. There are reasons for having sound holes a certain size or a certain location on a guitar. And there are good reasons for having them in a guitar. Same way with bevels. When I decided the style of bevel I wanted to use, the style was one that was very popular and had been popularized by another remarkable luthier named Kevin Ryan. And I had known Kevin over the years, and we had spent times sitting around the swimming pool at night in hotels, during guitar shows, talking for hours and stuff. And I called Kevin and I said, Kevin, everybody's putting bevels on, and some people are borrowing your design, and I just wondered if I could borrow your design. And he said, Gerald, well, you're one of the good guys. He said, most people just steal my ideas without asking.
Thanks for asking, yeah.
But yeah, I used his design, and the reason was because of all the designs, his was more universal. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter how long or short your arms were, the bevel still worked.
Right.
But moving in that direction was something that's dictated by your market.
Right.
You have to listen to your market.
Right.
And if you start ignoring your market, you do two things. One is somebody else gets that piece. Mm-hmm. But two is you never challenge yourself to do those things that usually ultimately teach you to do other things well too, and usually end up being easy after a while and give you, again, the larger market share.
More arrows in your quiver in terms of skill.
Yeah.
And I think if you set yourself up, or if you, like, as you say, hang your shingle out as a custom builder, I think you really need to offer, things that are popular within the market, because you're paying attention to your customer, and you're giving people essentially what they want, or what they may ask for.
Becoming good at something, becoming, quote, a master, and I've never referred to myself as a master, but you not only have to know what you're doing, but you have to know why you're doing it. And you have to really thoroughly understand why you're doing it. Something as simple as a guitar setup, I've heard explained so many ways wrongly.
Right.
By people that just talk about what you do,
mm-hmm.
but they don't understand the why.
Right.
So not understanding the why, they don't understand the order it needs to be done, and the things that have to play and the interplay of the
mm-hmm.
instrument when something as simple as a setup is done. That question why is really, really important in a business that you run yourself, where you have to decide what you want to do.
Right.
Well,
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that work in tandem there.
mm-hmm.
And also what I try to do when I do setup work is I talk to my customer. What style of music do you play? Mm-hmm. Are you heavy-handed? Because I have a certain customer that has big hands. I mean, he's a very strong, very big guy, right? And the way that he plays, his normal setup, a typical normal setup would be like 3/30 seconds, a fairly low action. But his is like an eighth of an inch. I mean, this guy uses super heavy strings. The way he plays is very aggressive. So a typical setup, what we would think of as like kind of your normal, low action setup on an electric guitar, it absolutely does not work for him. everything frets out. His guitar sounds very dead. But over the years of working with him and doing repair and tech work for him, I've learned to just take all of his stuff and just raise it up real high. Sounds great. He loves it. Happy customer.
That falls into play in making instruments. When you go in and tell the tailor that you want a suit, the tailor just don't take a bunch of Chinese suits off the wall and hand them to you. He starts measuring you. He wants to know all about your physique and all that sort of thing before he can make you that suit that works well for you. And building an instrument, when guys would call me, and there would be a lot of questions, about why you want this way or something that way, and a lot of it would fall into how hard do you play? How do you play with your fingers? Do you play with a pick? Do you play with fingernails or pads on your fingers? Do you have long fingers? Do you have short hands? Do you have short arms? Are you tall? Are you short?
Right.
Do you have a large belly? I mean, there's all kinds of questions. And for women, there's other physical things that can get in the way. And so you have to think about a tailor-made instrument from that point of view. And that all comes into play again. If you go buy a guitar off the wall at your local guitar shop, it will suffice for 90% of the people. But it's a one-size-fits-all.
Right.
And handmade instruments need to relate directly to that first customer.
Mm-hmm.
That's the person who's paying you the money, and that's the person who wants it specifically for them. And you've probably heard this 1,000 times. I've always wanted a really nice guitar, and I finally got the money, and I'm going to have you make me a guitar that I'm going to keep for the rest of my life and give to my children.
My perfect guitar is how one of my customers put it.
Yeah, and so that's a hard challenge, but that's what you...
That's a little bit of pressure.
Yeah, that's what you take on. The
Ultimately.
quest with them is to get that into their hands.
Absolutely. As far as neck profiles go, how do you... so kind of talk in the same vein of working with your customers. Do you talk to them about what type of neck they prefer? Do you have in terms of your process of making them, do you offer a fat neck, a thin neck, a skinny neck, or how does that work for you?
That's not something that has come into play very often for me, because I play fingerstyle guitar. And because my customers mostly played fingerstyle guitar, a lot of the customers grew up who played that kind of music. They grew up playing a Martin or a Taylor or another brand name that already had those necks that were all very close to each other.
Right.
And most of the folks wanted a little bit wider neck with that is wider all the way down,
mm-hmm.
because they want to be able to play that style of music without up on the neck, touch one string but not touch the adjacent string, not deaden it and all that sort of thing. Those kinds of things were more important than the fatness or the thickness of the back of the neck. I had a standard neck that was very close to a Martin or a Taylor, a Martin OM or a modern one, low profile,
mm-hmm.
or a Taylor low profile. The people who wanted something different, we would just talk about it, and I would make it that way, but very seldom did I have requests for that.
Really?
One of the things I noticed for me, and I won't say that everything I notice for me is good for everybody else, but a lot of times it is. Whether I'm happy with the sound or happy with the feel, the setup, or the action height, and all that sort of thing. One of the things that I found was that if I play a guitar that's got a neck that's different than I'm used to, usually within about 15 to 30 minutes, my brain and my hands are starting to adapt to that.
Right.
And if I have it for a week and then I go back to one of my other guitars, the other guitar feels funny.
Right.
It feels just as funny or weird, and then I go back and I get used to that. Now, there are certain things, though, that you have to consider when you're when you're building a guitar and you're considering, especially fingerstyle. Many times people who are playing fingerstyle, they're playing two strings or one string at a time or that sort of thing. They're plucking those and they're leaving other strings either dead or open. They're reaching across the fingerboard in two different directions. They got maybe their first or second fingers on the first or second strings, and then they got their third and fourth fingers way over, 2 frets up on the sixth string maybe. Well, that's a lot of reaching, and that's little it's acrobatics for that left hand if you're right-handed. And because of that, here's an example. A lot of folks don't really realize that when you reach down and play a B string on the second fret, the second string on the second fret, your finger is going to go straight down on that string.
Mm-hmm.
But when you reach across and play the sixth string on the fourth fret, your finger, unless you've got really long fingers like I do, your finger is going to go down at an angle.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not careful, you'll bend that string, you'll pull it sharp, or you'll slide it right off the edge of the fingerboard.
Right.
So if a person tends to do that, they have two choices. One is to learn how not to do that, and sometimes it's hard because they physically can't. They have small fingers, they have fat fingers, whatever. Or you design a fingerboard or you work on that fingerboard design a little bit to help them with that. Those sorts of things, I think, are rather important as compared to just neck thickness. Now, neck thickness can be important too, because you've got to get your hand all the way around it.
Right.
Modern guitarists often use their thumb across the top side as well as setting it on the back of the fingerboard, depending on the situation. There's several things that come into play when it comes to neck design.
Yep. Does scale length ever play do you use a standard scale length, or have you in the past offered different scale lengths to maybe compensate for someone that perhaps has smaller hands? Or
I do. My scale lengths for the most part were 25.4, and that's a standard on Martin's dreadnoughts and whatever. That's just what people are used to.
Right.
And why give them something that's significantly different? Now, you're not going to notice a 25.5 or 25.3 or something like that. A normal player is not really even going to notice that. But if you move to the scale, the other Martin scale, the 24.9, that's a whole half of an inch different. And
absolutely.
So a person may notice that.
Mm-hmm. I know in the electric guitar world, I often go back between a 25.5 inch, which of course is the Fender scale length, and then of course the Gibson scale length is 24.75.
Right.
So there are definitely camps of customers that are very far in one direction or very far in the other, and very rarely do they switch sides. They really either like the 25.5 scale length, or they really have gotten used to. And like you were saying earlier, when you go from one guitar to the other, just myself, I notice immediately a difference between the Gibson style shorter scale length.
And those scale lengths those people are that way for a good reason. It's not necessarily subjective. Whether it's electric or acoustic guitars, scale length impacts playability, and it impacts tone. It impacts the ability to bend strings.
String tension is
whether
a big
or not
one.
You have to use lighter gauge strings to get that same bend. You're trying to bend a string. You want to bend a full half step or a full step with it, or two steps, whatever.
Right, yeah.
It depends
Extreme.
on how strong these guys' hands are. But you don't want to bend almost a half step or
Right.
almost a full step, because that's flat.
Right.
Well, if you move from one scale length to another, whether it's on acoustic or an electric, and you're kind of quickly used to just subconsciously putting a certain amount of pressure at a certain angle on that string to get there, sometimes you don't get there, or sometimes you get too far.
Right.
So another thing about like the 24.9 scale, the 24.9 scale as opposed to 25.4 scale, it's a shorter scale, so the strings are under less tension. As a person gets in their late 50s, early 60s, 70s, that plays a big part on the ability to play the guitar as well as they did when they were younger. It also impacts on an acoustic guitar. The tone is different on a shorter scale guitar than it is on a longer scale guitar. For the most part, it doesn't matter, but if you're a person who likes that tone, it's important to you.
Oh, absolutely.
So, scale length is it's more important to some people than others, and some of it's subjective, and some of it is for really good reason. Yeah, something that I do, I learned a long time ago when I was young that when I moved to an electric guitar, then back to an acoustic guitar, there was usually a significant difference in playability.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not saying one was worse than the other, it's just that you had to get used to it. So now that
it's almost two different instruments.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you have to approach them stylistically very different.
Now that I play I play a hollow body electric guitar on my gigs. So I play that guitar a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I play the acoustic guitar. I set them both up the same way. I use the same gauge strings, and I use the same action height. I think the electric's slightly lower, but what I want to be able to do is if like I'm doing a gig and I'm doing both guitars, I don't want my hands to have to go through, and my mind to have to go through that mental change for the first few minutes when I pick up the different guitars. So I set them up pretty much the same. But you still have that scale length difference. Yeah. So that tension is slightly different.
Right.
And it's not too noticeable if you set them both up the same. But,
right.
But there's that has been my answer, is just to put heavier gauge strings on the electric and do it that way. Now, the kind of music I play actually allows for that, because what I play is a little bit more of the way a person would set up a jazz guitar, which is going to be with heavier strings anyhow. So that's not an issue for me. If a guy likes to play acoustic one way, folk music, and then when he's on his electric and he's bending those strings and rocking out, he just needs to learn to adapt.
Right.
He or she, I should say. But
especially if you're a strummer, there's a world of difference. Strumming an acoustic versus trying to strum on an electric. It's a totally different animal.
Yeah. You imagine all the buzzing that occurs when you.
I know. Well, that's what I deal with. So, Gerald, what are you doing now as far as musically?
I still accompany people every once in a while, but I play mostly instrumental music. And I used to know a fella years ago. I asked him what kind of music he played, and he said, "I just play purdy music." I thought that was the coolest thing to say, and he did. He was a wonderful guitarist. He passed away. But I kind of picked up that. People say, "What do you play?" I say, "Well, I just play pretty music," because I try to play music with a little sensitivity and the kind of stuff that soothes people in a way. But I play. I've got a niche for background or music during like special dinners or art shows and things like that. I do some upfront work. I don't mind getting up front, and I sing badly. I do write.
I'm right there with you.
I do sing. I do write songs. But most of the time when I'm getting paid to do it, I do what I do well, and so that is to avoid the singing. But I can get up in front of people and do upfront shows, and so I've done music, for example, locally at the Lumac on top of the Bristol Hotel.
That's a great venue. I really like that.
And where you're interacting with your audience. One of the things that I've been fortunate about, I think, is that I get a little bit of respect from other guitar players. They'll just sit right on the front row and intimidate the crap out of me because I know they're just watching everything I do.
Musicians I think are the worst crowd. I don't like to play in front of other musicians.
I know that is a compliment, but anyhow,
it's a little unnerving.
I'm booked next year once a month, pretty much all through the year at the Blackbird Bakery, and I'm booked all year at the Vivian's in the downstairs in the restaurant, the nice fine dining restaurant at the Bristol Hotel.
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as the material's concerned, are you playing standards? Are you playing mostly covers? What type of material? I mean, I know you said it's mostly instrumental, so I mean, what should people expect to hear?
It's mostly, if I said mostly, at least half of a 2 or 3 hour set is going to be stuff that was popular from the 60s through the 80s.
Okay. It's
going to be Fleetwood Mac and Sting and the Beatles and stuff like that. Van Morrison.
Right.
Stuff I grew up with, some of it.
Right. I was going to try to cover some of that on the podcast, but I think you pretty much answered the question as far as what your influences were.
Now, actually, my influences for guitar playing go back to people like Mason Williams and Jose Feliciano.
Oh, right, yeah.
The Eagles. I think it's Don Felder who played such beautiful electric. People like that. That was when I was young, when I was really, really young and trying to learn how to play. And I learned that any chord all you had to do is find the chords and the melodies were in there.
Because, absolutely.
And I didn't know it was called fingerstyle. I don't think it was back then, but I found out other people were doing that, and we all found each other later on.
Were you a Chet Atkins fan?
I was, but I never played like Chet. A lot of the songs I play, though, I love Celtic music. I don't like jigs and reels much, but I do like airs and ballads, and so there are some beautiful Celtic pieces, Scottish and Irish, Welsh, that I will incorporate in my gigs.
I love the changes and the beautiful melodies that lie within that.
Right. The 1920s, I know a little bit of Gershwin, and I know a little bit of the 40s and 50s music that my grandparents grew up with. Things like Moonlight in Vermont and some of that other really, When I Fall in Love by Nat King Cole.
Right.
A lot of times I'll watch the clientele come into a restaurant and I'll play them a song. Now, they don't know I'm playing them a song. I'll just say, at their age, I bet they'll like this.
Right. There's a wonderful exchange of energy there.
Yeah.
From the musician to the listener.
And, it's just like the finesse of guitar making when you're playing out. If there's a secret that I wish everybody knew, is that you want to draw people in with your music and not run them out the door. Keep the volume down and keep their feet tapping.
Right.
Yep. They don't have to be paying attention to you to know you're there and to be enjoying you. So you don't have to be making it hard for them to converse.
Right.
And you just need to give them something where they're saying, I've heard that song. What is that song?
Yeah. Just try to create a nice atmosphere.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I know you said you played acoustic and electric on your shows. Do you still play one of your guitars? Do you play your Sheppard?
If I play the acoustic, it'll be one of mine. If I play the electric, I've got a Gibson ES335, which I don't play much anymore because it's big and bulky and heavy.
Oh, I know. I had one of those for a while. They are unbelievably heavy.
I just bought an Eastman 14-inch hollow body guitar. Which
those are beautiful guitars.
Got a carved top on it.
Yeah.
Very responsive. Lawler pickups. It's a wonderful instrument, and it weighs about half what the ES335. It's a whole lot less cumbersome. And,
now, are you playing flat wounds or round wounds?
I'm playing round wound jazz strings, light gauge, 12s.
Yeah.
And with a wound third string.
Okay.
This is because that's what I'm used to on the acoustic. I can move back and forth. I don't do much bending. I slide some, but I don't do a whole lot of bending. And I don't really need really light gauge strings at all. And I like the feel and the sound of wound strings.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
I used to play with half rounds, but they seemed a little bit thin sounding to me.
Right. It's almost like there's a blanket on your amplifier.
Right.
It's just the tone is just not. I think once in the era that flat wound strings were popular, that's the tone that people were familiar with. But I think once you go to round wounds, there's a noticeable difference. I find that with bass strings too, because I play a lot of upright bass and electric bass. Depending on what type of music I'm playing, what kind of session I'm in, I like the feel of the flat wounds because they feel so slick and they're nice. But you cannot play rock with flat wounds. It just you can't go there.
No, there's certain things, and that's just another thing, is the people who design strings spend a lot of time and effort to engineering those things to build them for the type of music a person plays and their approach to the strings. And it's just like building guitars. It's just a tool, and you find the right tool, whether it's strings or the right guitar or whatever it is.
Well, Gerald, I really appreciate you coming and talking to me today. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I could sit here and talk to you all day about guitar building, but, I think we may lose some people.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you very much for coming and talking to me today. And if you want to catch Gerald out live, you can check him out on Facebook. Or if you're interested in his guitar making, check out his website at shepherdguitars.com.
Actually, just type my name as you've seen it around. Just Google me. I mean, that's all you got to do.
Just Google me. You'll find me. Okay. Thanks, Gerald. See you, buddy.
Okay. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye.